This is a wonderful session that's named Conducting an Effective and Impactful Customized Plan for Employment. And our speakers are Randy Dix and your first name? Marie Palmer. Okay. Sorry, they had another name on here. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And I think this is going to be just an amazing, informative session. So welcome and
thank you. So happy to be here with all of you today. Your state is so sunny and beautiful. We're in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so this is a lovely change of pace. I'm Marie Palmer. I've been involved in employment services for over a decade as a professional. I work in a role as a direct provider of the service, as well as a provider administrator, in addition to some of the work that I'm doing with Marc and Associates. I also have a history with a family member who had a very significant disability, who I was the primary caregiver for many years. So I understand wearing these multiple hats, multiple roles that we're juggling, and I hope to bring something to you from each of those perspectives. Randy?
Hello, I'm Randy Dix. I'm the Director of Certification for MGNA. I'm also the Director of Community-Based Programs at Envision that Marie was talking about. We've worked together at the provider agency for over 10 years, and I just tend to drag Marie into whatever it is I'm doing. So when I started with MGNA about 10 years ago, I said, well, you need to be part of this too. So we just kind of worked together. As Marie said, we're from Pittsburgh. I've got a slightly different opinion. I love your state, but I didn't realize I was stepping into an oven when I got off the plane. And I thought, I realize I'm the shape of a turkey, but no one has basted me and prepared me for this when I got here. So we're happy to jump into things today. Who is familiar with MGNA? Who's familiar with the work MGNA has done? So you're probably used to hearing us talk about customized employment, right? You're not going to see a lot of that appear today. However, you're going to see the same principles. When we talk about planning, everything should be customized. So we've taken out the words customized employment from the presentation because we can still do a plan that has a significant impact and is customized for someone, whether we've went the traditional discovery route of getting there or just taking time to know someone. So we can go ahead and go on. We can see here are our session objectives for today, and I'm not going to read all of them to you, but essentially, we want to learn how we can get to know people and help them plan for their future that's going to include employment. Go ahead and go on. First couple of slides, we're just going to go through pretty quick because we do have 48 slides to get through in the presentation, including about 10 minutes. Did anyone tell you this was going to be interactive and y'all had to participate before you came in? Okay, well, shut the doors quick because no one's allowed to leave now. You're all here. But we're trying to save about 10 minutes to 15 minutes at the end for you to practice what it is that we're going to talk about today. I'm a big believer in, I don't learn from sitting and listening to people. I need to do it for it really to sink in for me. So we want to talk about being person-centered. Here we've got the Wikipedia definition of person-centered. But when we look at mid-paragraph here, gifts, skills, capacities, listening to what's important to the person, as we prepare to help someone transition into the world of employment, those are the key things that we really want to focus on and getting to know someone and help understand what's going to be meaningful for that person. Anyone here who's ever been given a job, maybe your parents own a company or something, and you've just been told this is what your job is going to be right now? Anyone in that situation? Good, I'm glad you're not. But my family owned a pizza shop growing up. Guess what I did when I was in high school? I worked at that pizza shop on Friday nights, on Saturday nights, when all of my friends were going to do the things they wanted to do. My dad said, nope, you've got to work. Think I was very happy about it? Not really. I could do what needed to be done. I had the capabilities of doing the job, but it didn't have meaning to me. And so that's a piece of what we want to think about when we're doing effective planning for people is how do we learn what's meaningful? One of the things I tell people frequently is when we're making that match from the job seeker to the employer, it has to work for everyone or it doesn't work for anyone. So what I mean by that is we might think, well, Marie can do this. So we're going to get this job for her. But if she's not happy, what's going to happen? She's going to leave in a few months, right? And then me as a job developer, I'm doing the same job for the same person over and over again. And so I want to make sure it works for everyone. So that's when we really have a match. Go ahead, go on. And so here we want to look at traditional services versus individualized services. So on the right side, we can see the slide tells us, when we look at traditional services, we've got assessment, we've got evaluations. A lot of times we highlight the deficit in people, right? How many times do we read a plan for someone and we put the plan down and we think, now I know everything that this person can't do? And we're left wondering at times, what is it that are the strengths of the person? Because plans are often written to that deficit. And then programs typically offer a set menu of services in a traditional approach. Here's our a la carte menu, pick what you want. And then families are asked really for their approval. A lot of times it's not, not a collaboration in a traditional service. We have had Envision, I think this is kind of funny. We do customized employment. And I might steal Marie's thunder, but I don't think you were planning on talking about this. But Marie went out, I don't know, like 6-8 months ago to meet a new family to do discovery. And walked in and the family said, what are the activities you're going to do? What time do they happen? What do we need to plan for? And Marie said, well, I was going to ask you that question because my job is to get to know you. And my job is to see the things that your family's doing to learn who your son is and figure things out. And it really took that family by surprise because in all of their other professional relationships with employment staff, it was someone coming in and telling them, this is what we're doing. And so it was a bit of a different approach. And you can see that here in individualized services. So, we want to make sure we're focusing on things that are non-competitive. It's getting to know someone based on their strengths and interest. So we don't want to compare someone to another person. Everything is going to be person-centered. And the third bullet, I think, is super important. Families and non-paid supporters are welcome to the employment process because we want to know who knows our job seeker the best. Those are the people that we want to make connections with if we're going to be able to plan effectively. So who is involved in your life? What does that look like? Let me talk to them. And when I talk to them, I want to find out when they see you at your best. So Marie and I just had a chance again last week to do an initial discovery meeting with a family. And one of the first things I said is, tell me 3 really cool things about your son. What are 3 just things that you think, wow? And you could tell they looked at us first like, what? And then we talked about those things. And in, oh my gosh, a matter of 5 minutes, they gave us so much information to say, well, he lives in a residential program. But when he comes home on Saturdays, the first thing he does is walk through the house to see what's out of place because everything has to be put back in place. And then after he does that, he goes into each bathroom and takes the towels off the rack because he wants to wash them. And then he asks his dad if there's a Walmart order because he has to put things away. And when we started talking, we said, that's a lot of task. That's a lot of skill that we learned in literally less than a 5-minute conversation. And it really, for these parents, because they're fighting a battle where they can see opportunity for their son, but some of the providers working with him don't think that he's employable. And so it was really eye-opening for them when we pointed out these skills that we saw in just a few minutes. So keeping in mind, the family and non-paid supporters are very important. And we want to make sure we're looking at our outside funding, at services within the system, as well as natural supports that come from those families and friends. Oh, there it is. So this slide reminds me of someone named Margaret that I did some mentoring with as she was going through the discovery process. And Margaret had worked in vocational services for over 30 years before she started doing discovery. And one of the things that she told me was, I always have very little time to find someone a job, and I don't know much about the person. And I'm just expected to go find a job. And she said so many times that's resulted in a poor job match. Or if it's taken her too long to find the job, people start thinking this person can't work. Now, a little later today, we're going to actually see Margaret's very first success story from Discovery, which is super exciting. But going through the customized process, she came out with a very different approach to what she thought of employment, even after she had been doing it for 30 years. And go on. And here, just what do we see? This is part of the interactive part. What do we notice here? Different perspectives, yes. So who's right and who's wrong? They're both right, but we have to take time to move around to the other side to see that other perspective, right? And so we always want to remember that when we're thinking about our job seekers and their families as well. Similar, the 6 and 9. And I love how with this one it says, just because you're right does not mean I'm wrong. You just haven't seen life from my side. And I love that because I think it's so true in the work we do. And a couple of my favorite quotes here, the top one on the left there, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And I think that's so important when we're looking at individualized services. Let's put everything we think we know as professionals aside, and let's just look at who this person is. What makes this person tick? What works and what doesn't work for this person? And when we know that, we can help them plan. I think so often we're used to being the superhero in a sense. We're called in to save the day and find a job or make something happen. And we do that, but it's important that we do that in conjunction and collaboration with the person and the family. And we can go on. And so here, this really starts with our belief. Everyone can work. Employment is our vision. And so we see here beliefs generate belief and motivation. Belief opens doors. Belief allows you and others to see possibilities and opportunities. And I think that's so important, especially when we're looking at trans growth, that they see the opportunity and possibility in front of them in their future. A lot of people, unfortunately, that I've worked with over the years have been taught to think the workshop is what comes next. And once they get to that workshop, they stay in that workshop for 20 years. And so when I look at this, I think of belief and possibility, but I also think about responsibility. As professionals, we have an obligation to help people understand their responsibility to transition into adult life. That's going to include work. Because quite honestly, not many of us picked work, right? Here's some people laughing. How many of us, when we were getting ready to educate or to leave our high school experience, how many of your parents sat you down and said, do you want to work or just stay home? It didn't, we knew, the thing is, we knew we were expected to go on and continue after that education. Now, whether that involved going straight to work or going to college or technical program or military, whatever it might be, we knew there was something next. And we knew the something next wasn't optional, but we were expected to move into the next phase. And so I think that's a part of it here. We want to believe people have capabilities and create those opportunities, but we want to help them see that and really generate excitement about moving on. So here, how do we do this? It's a lot, right? And we see a lot up here, but we want to learn about when the job seeker is at their best. You know, what does the job seeker look at when they're at their best? If you think somebody likes something, what do you see in the person's expression? What is it that the look they get? Is it that they talk about it nonstop? Often I'll ask people, you know, if Susie had nothing on her schedule today, what is it that she would do when she gets up in the morning? That helps me see what somebody's interest area might be. And generally, when people are doing those things that they have a vested interest in, we see them at their best. So we want to make sure we have an opportunity to capture some of those things. And seeing the job seeker in a variety of settings. And so this happens outside of our office. Because if we call someone in to our office to have a chat, to do an assessment or evaluation, do you think we always get the best of who that person is? No. You know, people think, for one, they get a little bit scared. Why am I sitting here? What's going on? What's going to happen? You know, what if I fail the test? You know, anyone here have test anxiety? I've got horrible test anxiety. And the thing that I use to help explain this for myself, anyone here familiar with APSES, CESP, Certified Employment Support Professional? I will not take the CESP test. I'm the director of certification for MGNA. I certify people nationally. Marie is on the committee that writes the questions for the APSE test. I'm sure I could take this test in my sleep. However, I've got horrible test anxiety and cannot make myself sit for the test. So for me, it's one of those ways that for me helps me understand people we support. I often tell people we're all more alike than we are different. And so if we can take that time to find that similarity, for me, because I won't sit for a test that I know I would pass, I understand if somebody gets nervous coming into a setting that's not familiar to them. So I have the capability of going to a setting that is familiar to them. And that's when I'm going to see more authentically who that person is and what they do. Bringing in people who know the person and are positive in planning. And that's really important as well. Not just that people know your job seeker, but they can share that positive information about the job seeker. Because I always tell people also, have that Uncle George. At least in my family, it's Uncle George. Y'all probably know who I'm talking about, though. The one that's the naysayer for everything. I can tell you know, you're thinking of whoever that person is right now. But that's not the person we want at the table for this. Because we can all sit all day and poke holes in something. But we want people who are going to see the opportunity to move forward and help us move forward. We start with the job seeker, not the employer. And that's one of the things I know Marie and I get questions about as well. When we meet someone new, they'll say, where are you thinking about applying for jobs? And I'll say, well, I have no idea. I need to get to know your loved one first. We need to go through some things, and then we'll figure it out together. And sometimes families, it's a very different approach for a lot of people. So sometimes they look at us like, did we bring the right people into this? And I've had people look at me that way, like, I'm not sure we've hired the right group of people for this, until we get to the end of the process and they see the difference it's made. Because if I take time investing in knowing the job seeker, I'm going to create that match that works for everyone. So really important to do that. Honoring what the job seeker needs to be successful. You'll see in a few slides, we call those conditions of employment. And the thing is, we all have conditions of employment. It might be the time of day. It might be the location of the job. It might be the environment. All of those things, we know the conditions with which we'll accept or reject a job. And it's important that we understand that for the people we support. I've been part of many, many meetings where I've had county officials and state officials from funding sources tell the person, well, this is just the job. An example is someone who did not want to work on Wednesday evenings. He was open to working any other time of the week, but Survivor, the TV show, is very important to him. And he did not want to work on Wednesday evenings because he watched Survivor. He understands DVR. He does not want to DVR Survivor. He wants to be home on Wednesday evening to work that, or watch it rather. That became a condition of employment for him. And I watched state officials tell him, well, that's crazy. You just have to work whenever the employer wants you to work. Now, my perspective, because I deal in customized employment, was there are like 160 other hours in the week. He's asking for like a 2-hour time frame that he doesn't work. I think it's perfectly reasonable that we can negotiate that, especially because for the type of job he was looking for, they needed people on the weekends. And he was willing to work every Saturday and Sunday if he didn't have to work Wednesday night. So that was a condition that we had to keep in mind, that no Wednesday evening work. And this last one here, regardless of the complexities, we can obtain, integrated employment for someone, competitive integrated employment, regardless of their complexity. It takes getting to know the person. The more complexity someone brings to the table, the more difficult our job might be. We might have to keep working a little harder to get there, but we don't give up on people. For MG&A in particular, that's our tagline, try another way. And sometimes we've got to try 50 ways before we find the right one. But you keep going because there is a job for everyone. All right, so our rules here, and just checking to make sure we're doing okay time-wise. But rule number 1, let go of assumptions. What do we think that means? Who can tell me? You see this, what comes to mind? Go ahead.
You take a look at somebody, you size them up, and then you automatically think you know what they can and can't do.
Yeah. We think going into a situation because of either what we've seen or maybe been told. I think it can be a combination of both. We assume that we know everything at that point. So we have to let go of those assumptions and check them at the door when we walk in. And rule number 2 is understand who job seekers are. Now, there's a bunch of stuff that comes along with rule number 2, we can see, right? And so some of those things are what's important to that person. What do they look forward to? What are they proud of? How many do we meet someone that we're going to support and ask that person, what are you proud of? What's your biggest accomplishment? When you start the conversation that way, it sets it up for success. Because we're not coming in pointing out what someone can't do. Attitudes about money. What does the person want to buy? And when you start talking about that too, it helps set the framework for what work might look like. It helps set the framework for how many hours might this person want to work? What's the hourly amount someone needs to make to purchase the things or pay the bills they need to pay? And then lastly, we look at our interest, our contributions and conditions, and we're going to get a little more into that in a few slides coming up. So some more considerations for learning about the job seeker. Descriptive language. I wish I could put this in a super large font here because it's so important that we learn to be descriptive. And when we talk about being descriptive, we're talking about action words. So, if we describe something using action words, Marie walked from the laptop to the end of the hallway about 500 feet in 10 seconds. That gives us some things that help us measure what Marie did. It's not comparing her to someone else, but it helps us see what she does. So we can start thinking about task. We can see walking as a task. As we observe people in different situations, we can see a level of stamina people have and what that looks like. But again, make sure that we describe. And I already said this, but we don't compare. And when we describe, we see possibilities begin to emerge because we're using those action words. And when we use those action verbs in the active tense, we're not evaluating, but rather it is what it is. Marie picks up the laptop, carries it to the table, and puts it in a bag. When we see things like that, we can begin translating what else it might be. Taking that sentence very quickly, what's something else she can do? We can see she picks up, unplugs the laptop, puts it in the bag. What might that translate to depending on her interest? Anyone? Yeah, she puts something in a bag. So it might be possibly working in retail or in a grocery environment. It might be, she was the person who had an interest in art. Maybe that translates somehow to wrapping a piece of art. We want to unpack and explore a little more, but we don't want to just assume all she does is put that laptop in a bag. We always want to think, this is what we saw, and what else might it mean? How do we unpack things to figure out what else it might mean? And part of that is checking back in. That, Marie, I saw this, and so I know you can do that, and I know that you really like clothes. So maybe you have an interest in folding clothes and putting them in boxes or bags, and you check in to see if you're on the right track with something. Go ahead and go on. Okay, so can everyone read this from the back? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. And should tell Rentu, we have a sheet up front. If you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint, just give us your name and email, and I'll email it out to you so that everyone has a copy. But we've got 3 different statements here. And if we look at the very bottom, these are some examples of a note. We watch somebody do a task, and these are 3 different examples. These are actually real examples from a training that I did, that this is what people wrote. And so we want to look at the 3. I think there are some that are evaluative, maybe one that's just the facts and one's more descriptive. So we'll start with the bottom. Walt opened the gate. Walt commented about the hedges. Walt fed the cows. Do we think that is evaluative? Do we think it's just the facts, or is it descriptive? Just the facts. If anyone's familiar with Sherlock Holmes, right? Just the facts. Like, it's what he did, but does that help you really understand Walt and how he does a process? No, we know he did these things. We don't dispute that he did them, but I didn't learn anything about Walt by seeing that. How about the adult was able to use both hands to unlock a tied rope that was in place to lock a gate for a field with cows in it. The adult was next able to verbally talk to cows in a calm voice to announce his presence. Evaluative, just the facts, or more descriptive? Evaluative. This is how most of us have been trained to write something in a plan, right? And the thing is that when we think of a traditional plan for someone, we might still see things written that way. And I can see a little of what Walt does, but the fact that he's able to this and that, it's evaluative language that we're using. But the one on the top, Walt walked to the cow pasture over a surface of dirt and gravel, feed bucket in hand. He sat the feed bucket on the ground while he used both hands to untie a knot in rope that was used to keep the gate closed. He opened the gate, picked up the bucket, and walked in. Once in the gate, he paused, turned, and closed the gate. He continued to walk to the cow trough, where the trough. He poured the feed into the trough, or as he poured the feed into the trough, he talked to them and remarked about how much the cows eat. This process takes Will about 1 minute and 15 seconds. So from this one, would we agree it's more descriptive? Now, the next step in this is let's pick out the task. Who can tell me what task we see in this? Feeds cows, yeah. What else?
I'm just gonna say that you have so much more in there. The very first sentence, describing the type of service he walked over dirt and gravel. It tells you about his mobility.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's not just that he's walking, but he's walking on uneven surfaces too. So right away, I know he's ambulatory, he walks. If he's walking on dirt and gravel, he might navigate stairs. There's a whole host of things that might open itself up to, absolutely. What else? Yeah, I think you kind of read through this, and this is where I check back in with him to make sure I'm on the right track. But I think that when he's doing this and he's feeding the cows and talking to them, it's kind of like, this is my thing. This is what I do. And even though this is a written statement about him, it kind of shines through. I think that you can see that. Even he uses both hands to untie the knot and open it up. So often we might see, well, he's got good fine motor skills. And I think, well, I don't know what it means. Like, I know I see that written in plan all the time, but tell me what it means. Well, this I can picture, because then what else might he do that requires a similar motion? So if we write descriptively, again, it's just that those possibilities and the opportunities begin to emerge from what we see. And next slide. And then some things to keep in mind when we're writing. For one is we watch and not judge. It's so important to try to keep judgment or opinion to ourselves and just describe what we see. But what's happening? What's the location? What's the pace? What's the correctness of method? Now, when we're talking about that, we're still not comparing one person to another person. But here is the task that the person's doing. Is it being completed the way we think it would be completed? Do we end up with the correct result? That's what we're looking at. The outcome, the consistency. I can tell you the last one reminds me of Sonia, who's someone that I worked with doing Discovery. Marie knows Sonia. And when we met Sonia, Sonia worked at a commercial laundry facility. And she's someone who had a hearing impairment. And she had worked in this commercial laundry facility for 15 years and wanted to leave because she said the vibrations of the machines were giving her headaches. Now, we were called in by Voc Rehab basically because they wanted us to tell her, you've got a good job and you shouldn't change. Now, we're the worst people to call in for that because our approach was, I need to get to know Sonia, what she wants. Well, Sonia wanted to go into baking and she wanted to work in a bakery and bake things. And part of what we did in Discovery was we did a lot of baking of cookies and muffins. And one of the things that I was astonished by with Sonia is that every cookie was exactly the same size. And I'm just personally fascinated with that because Me and my kids, when they were little, we used to always like to bake, and you'd have one cookie that was the size of a pizza and one that was the size of a golf ball. And Sonia's cookies were always exactly the same. And so when we eventually began to job development for her, I could tell the employer that this is what I've seen. And that really helped with the consistency and knowing that from time spent getting to know her. Next, I think you're up, right?
So as we start to get to know the person and we spend time with them in all of the natural settings of their life, we see them in their home, we see them maybe at their school, in community settings, in their sports groups. We start to see all of this really good skill and tasks, and we start to see the possibilities. So if we have somebody who makes jewelry and we see how they put the bindings on and they string the beads on and they put things together and they put a sign up for sale, we start to see the possibilities of what else then could that person do. And then when we look at employers, we start to see how do we unbundle these tasks. So what are tasks that maybe are better off done by somebody else? What could we take off of that traditional job description and assign elsewhere? We have a really good story at our provider organization where we talk about our HR director at the time who was scanning files and sorting the files and naming them and doing all of these things that really took away from their other job duties as the HR director. And of course, those things kind of tend to get not done, right? You kind of shelf them because you don't have time to get to them, but they need done. So when Randy actually first started providing customized employment, he came in and started saying, okay, well, maybe we can do this at our organization. And he put together a job for a scanning clerk for somebody who would then sort and name and assign the files. Also saved a lot of money in storage of records that used to be paper records. So starting to see how those tasks could maybe go to somebody else and unbundle them. We're not taking anything away from the HR director. We're just taking off some tasks that maybe are better performed by somebody else. Kind of the same thing here with unmet needs and matching them to the job seeker's contributions. We always talk about how everywhere we go, we see unmet needs. Think about the last time you walked into a restaurant, how you're standing at the front. What do things look like? Is somebody coming over and greeting you within that 30 seconds of you arriving in the restaurant? Are things wiped off? Is the door clean on the way in? Is there silverware rolled and ready for you? Maybe some of those things don't get done, or maybe they get done, but during the busiest part of the day, it's hard for that greeter or that server to get to those pieces. So do you start to see how do we take some of those unmet needs and maybe start to create a job for somebody? Perhaps I'm not greeting all of the customers and assigning them to their table, but maybe my job is to roll the silverware so that that's good to go. And I'm doing it between 2 and 4 or whatever time you're busiest and you have the most demand for that silverware. So we're translating these tasks into something that the employer can really need and that they're going to benefit from. So we're never going to an employer and saying, you know, please help this person. You're going to feel so good about yourself if you give them the opportunity. We want to show both sides of the equation, how what our job seeker has to offer really lines up with the employer's unmet needs. When we balance the equation, win-win, right? It's good for everybody. We want to brainstorm about the information. So again, you're playing with all of your players in the team, and you want to talk about, well, what do you see? How might this fit? Where might this be a fit? What do you see in your community when you're out there? And we can start to bring people together to do that. And always we're observing rather than evaluating. So we want to talk about what do we see that the person does? How do they do that? Maybe what support is in place to help them be at their best, but compare them to this person or that person. And we always keep in mind that we're here to create a job. We're not here to decide if somebody can work. So before you start job development, there's a few things that you want to think about and have in mind about your job seeker. At MGNA, we always recommend going through that full discovery process, but you can pull pieces from that and bring them into any type of employment service you offer. You know, at our provider organization, we've been around for a while. So there have been times where we've been providing those community-based work assessments that are supposed to be whether the person can work. And we're figuring out what kind of skill is already there and how can we learn about this person to bring that in. So you can always incorporate elements of discovery just by being mindful and paying attention, taking the time to get to know the person, taking the time to talk to those people that are in their life that see them. When is this person at their best? What works? What doesn't work? Communication. So how does this person communicate and how do they respond to communication? We need to have that in place so that we can help them to be successful. Those daily routines, you know, Randy talked about this person watches Survivor every Wednesday. That's their routine. That's what's important to them. Somebody might be a morning person, so they're up very early, 6 a.m. Yeah, they've got the coffee ready. They made coffee for everybody in the house. Other people might be more of that night owl. So they're staying awake and that's kind of their natural rhythm. What works for them? And what things do they just happen to do and what things are important to them? We need to pay attention to as well. So maybe the person isn't really a night owl. They're just staying up late because they don't have anything else to do. There was one job that one of our vocational specialists created for an individual who really, really wanted to work at Victoria's Secret. And when she went and talked to him about the job, she knew he was a night owl and the job started at 5 a.m. And she was like, you know, I know it's your dream to work at Victoria's Secret. I have this to offer you, but it starts at 5 a.m. And I know that's kind of when you usually go to bed. What do you want to do? And he said, yep, I'm ready. Let's start tomorrow.
We should add there for that one, I think a really important point. This is someone who lived residentially with a provider agency. And the provider agency let us know that that was the worst possible thing in the world because he wasn't going to get up for the job. But Amanda, who was the staff who worked with him, Amanda went back to him to talk to him and say, this has been a dream for you. Is this a go or no go? Because it's up to you. And I'll let you finish because you started.
He's taking this one.
Okay.
But sometimes people are willing to, I don't know, willing to adjust. Opportunity is really good. All of us, right? Where are you willing to bend on what are your to what's a really no-go condition? And I think we all kind of know where those lines are. For each of us, we're willing to do something that maybe is a little bit outside of our preference or our comfort zone in order to pursue opportunities to really go after our goals. So why wouldn't the people we support be offered that, or at least offer that choice? Who is important in this person's life? It could be family members. It could be other service providers. It could be the church. These are all the people that we want to be talking to as we get ready for job development so that we get to know all aspects of this person. What things does the person do without being asked? So think about maybe family members in your home. What things come naturally? What are they intrinsically motivated to do? Is it cooking dinner? Is it mowing the grass? And what things do they really not want to do? So maybe I can take out the garbage, but I don't want to do that. I don't like taking out the garbage. It's messy. You gotta shove it down, get out the new bag. I can do that, but that doesn't mean that that needs to be all that I do, right? And what tasks does the job seeker do with or without support? So again, paying attention to not just does this person do this independently, as we see in plans a lot of the time, or with support, but what does that support really look like? So is this somebody who's next to them, providing some prompting, telling them what's next? Or is it a more intensive level of support? But what things can we put in place that works for that person? So maybe somebody really does understand the sequence of tasks. And if I'm next to them and I say, what's next? Then they move on. So other things before job development that we need to know about. When is the person at their best? And that can kind of be about time of day, setting, people that they're around, what kind of supervisor might work for this person? How do they like to receive instruction? I think all of us are a little bit different. You know, I do some coaching too. So thinking about what motivates some of the people I coach might be very tough kind of coach, do this now, or I might have to be really encouraging and talk to you and help you to kind of get over your anxiety. Mobility, pace, direction, supports, impact of the environment. Maybe somebody is great in a crowd. Maybe they're not. Maybe they prefer to be in a smaller setting, maybe with one or two other coworkers. Maybe they would do better in a setting where they're on their own. Maybe it doesn't matter. Academic, reading, money, math, writing, we all have skills. You know, unfortunately, I walk into so many of these meetings where we're talking about employment for the person. And the first thing they tell me is, can't work the cash register, not good at math, right? We've all heard that kind of thing. That's okay. What do you do? Where are your skills, right? We all have skills. We all have things that we're better, worse, that we prefer or don't prefer. They're there. What worries the job seeker about employment? And we can go all day about worries and family worries and provider worries. So getting to really understand those and know them as we move forward with looking for this job. So once you're there, you're making a list of what you know about the job seeker. This is information that you want to be able to share with their team as you move forward. All this information that you've learned by taking the time to get to know this person, spending time with them in their environment. What do you need to know? The approach is to get the information that you don't know. So maybe I'm finding out that there's a hole in what I know. Well, what do I do next? Is there a setting that I need to see them in? What I see at the school is often very different than what I see at the house or what I see on the sporting field, right? So what place might I need to go to, or who else might I need to? Oh, this one's dead now too.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're back with this one.
All right. And lastly, how do you verify that that information is accurate? And if it's inaccurate, you know, what are you going to do to address it or move on? Work characteristics. So by picturing all of those characteristics in the one workspace, we're able to identify possible business sites that could work for the job seeker. So we're starting to put things together. What do I know about my job seeker? And what do I know about this employer? Where are their unmet needs? And how do we start to match them? So we have the person's skills, talents, contributions, all that they have to offer, and how do we match that with our employer? So the purpose of the employment plan, recognition of the decision points. The person in charge of the plan is the job seeker. This is their plan, and we're looking at planning. This is their meeting. So everything that we do and talk about in the meeting needs to really respect them. And that person also has the authority to say, I don't want to talk about that today, or I want to talk about that, but maybe not with this big group of people. Maybe I want to talk about it with just one person that I trust, and then that person, I permit them to go back and share that. So other considerations in the planning meeting. The planning meeting, we want to hold that in a timely manner. So when we talk about, when we go in and work with job seekers, we're doing things a little bit differently than maybe they're expecting. You know, we talked about when you go to that initial meeting, sometimes those families, maybe other provider orgs are saying, well, okay, where are you going to put in those applications? And we do ask them to kind of pump the brakes there and let us take the time to get to know the person. But once you've done that, then you do need to move forward. So whether you've done a full discovery and completed that vocational profile, or whether you've just taken a few sessions to get to know the person, once that's done, you need to move forward in a timely manner. You can't do that and then keep getting to know the person forever, right? Sometimes it's kind of the opposite with our vocational specialists. They might feel really comfortable in discovery and they're doing activities and they're getting to know the person, but we need to also know when to move forward with the goal, which is the outcome is supposed to be always that customized job. So the planning meeting should be facilitated. There's 2 bullets on here, but there's 2 really important people that it should be the person that facilitated discovery, facilitated learning about the person who has that firsthand knowledge, that spent the time getting to know the person. And if they're going to be 2 different people, if we're going to have stuff from the person who got to know the person to a second person who's going to develop a really good job, both of those people in the room, you're planning, obviously. Other people that we want to be there. We want to have a nice balance of paid people and unpaid people if possible. So we don't, if we can avoid it, want to have just a room of all paid support people. But we also want to have those natural supports from the person's life. Could be neighbors, could be people from the community, from the church, from sports, wherever else they're involved. Could be that I go to the same craft store every Tuesday and I got to know Sally who works there and we spend some time together and she knows me and I want her at my planning meeting. But we want to try to have that balance of paid and unpaid people at the meeting. I think we're good. The plan should identify the individual's strengths, conditions, and interests. So what does the person do really well? What are they naturally interested in doing? And what has to be in place for the person to be successful? What needs to be absent for the person to be successful? What support strategies work best for that person? We want to include a prioritized list of potential employers. So when we're here making the plan, we are brainstorming with those individuals who are here at the meeting to come up with a list of employers in the community who we're then going to go talk to. Keeping in mind that when whoever is out there goes to do job development, it's going to be so much more impactful when they walk in and they knock on the door, or they call, or however they get there, and they're connecting with the employer. And they say, hey, we were in a meeting and we talked about this person's strengths, interests, contributions. We talked about these tasks and we saw how they could really be a benefit to your business. This whole group of people collaborated to choose you, to select you for us to come here and talk about customized employment, customized job development. I mean, how much more impactful is that than, well, I was going through the yellow pages and you were A, right? Or I was passing by. So we want to really show how that employer is qualified based on all of the steps we've done along the way with meeting with this group of people, identifying the tasks, identifying the strengths, conditions, and interests, and then how does this relate to this particular employer? Lastly, the plan has to be approved by the individual, could be with assistance if needed, but we're not going to move forward with employers. We're in Bel-
You got a leash now.
So that has to be,
Oh, just low level, right?
it has to be approved by your job seeker. So if I tell my job seeker, your strength, interest, contributions are perfect match for Best Buy, I'm going to go to Best Buy. And they say, well, I hate Best Buy. I'm not going there, even if the group thinks it's a great fit, right? Because this is their job, it's their life. So we are going to only move forward with their permission. Other principles for your planning meeting. Your job seeker, like I said, they're in control every step of the way. So they have that authority to say, yes, No, I like that one. I don't like that one. I would never work for those people. It's okay. There's other places they can work. Sharing of information for decision making. So like we talked about, who do they want in the room for decision making? Who maybe does have some of those trump cards in their life? So if my mom is going to be driving me to work every day, maybe she does have some impact to be able to say, well, I can drive you 10 miles and that's as far as I'm willing to drive you, right? So there might be people that have some other trump cards in the person's life. We talked about that one already. Yeah, good. So here's the 3 outcomes that we want for our plan. First is we want that blueprint that outlines the conditions for success, interest areas, and contributions. The contributions are really important. That's what do I have? What tasks? What positive personality characteristics? What about me do I have that I can contribute, that I'm bringing to the world? And this also really applies to volunteer work or other settings. What do I have to offer that I want to give to an employer? A task list for each interest area written in business language. So when I'm writing my task list in business language, if it's a business that I'm less familiar with, computers for me or anything mechanical, who can I go to that will help me to describe that task in a way that's going to be valid when I go in there and I'm talking to those business owners, so that I'm speaking their language and we're talking about the same thing. And then that list of specific employers who match the job seekers' conditions and success and interest areas. And I'm going to write them in order, right, of their most preferred to least preferred so that I know, but I might not necessarily visit the most preferred one first, right? I might give myself a little practice if I'm new. Other considerations, the plan is updated when there's significant changes that occur. Some that kind of occur all the time, or the person is moving. Maybe there's something new that's going on in their relationships. Maybe they have a change that's medical. There's a lot of things that happen in all of our lives that are going to impact things, make things different as far as work and where we might be wanting to work, what's going to make sense for us. If it's approved by the job seeker agency, VR, Medicaid, there's all these players that we're inviting to the table. So we want to make sure that what we're doing makes sense for everyone, especially your funding sources. We want to make sure that we're keeping our funding sources updated along the way so that they can continue to be supportive and help us reach the outcomes for the person. You want all these people to work together and understand as much as possible the perspectives of one another. And oftentimes that is the job developer's role, to help bring those people together. If they see a different priorities for the person's work, how do we bring it back to what makes sense for that person? And where are we? Oh, the visual resume. So consider making a visual resume. You know, a lot of the people that we support with customized employment don't necessarily have a traditional resume like we might think of. Maybe there's other formats that we can use. At Marc Gold & Associates, we teach extensively about the visual resume, which is a nice alternative to the resume that allows us to present a positive picture of the person, allows us to show the person completing tasks, and gives the employer a nice idea of who they are, what do they do. You know, a lot of the time, it allows us to take away some of that stigma of talking about person with a disability too. It lets us just show who the person is and what they do. Is this back to you? All right.
Okay, so we've talked about the components of the plan. Now we're going to dive in and actually see an example of a plan. So we're going to see Caesar. Remember, I started telling you about Margaret, who was 70 when she started doing discovery and customized employment and never knew about or enough about her job seekers. Well, Caesar is who helped Margaret realize there was another way of doing things. She was going through our MGNA performance-based certification and discovery, and I was fortunate to get to mentor her through that process. So Margaret and I together did a lot of work with Caesar. So this is just some basic information about Caesar. He lives in Colorado, very, very small community in Colorado. Margaret really didn't think that there was going to be a job for him, even though she wanted there to be, because she thought At best, I've got 15 employers. I'll jump to the end of the story and I'll let you know that after we got through this planning process with Caesar, Margaret had an offer from 2 of those employers when she thought the community was so small, she didn't know if there was something there for Caesar. He speaks Spanish and he's bilingual, but his parents only speak Spanish. So that created a barrier for Margaret, who didn't speak Spanish. So we had to go through this process and planning with the use of an interpreter as well. And he was looking forward to going to work. He's an artist. This is some of the art that he's drawn. He's won some awards for his art. He's also a gamer. One of the things we recommend in getting to know someone is do a new activity. You know, what's something the person maybe has wanted to do, but they've never done? And so that helps us learn about how the job seeker learns. Now, the thing that was unique here is that Caesar's a gamer. He's always done gaming, but he had never taught someone how to play a video game. And Margaret, at 70, had never played Xbox before. Go figure. But Caesar taught Margaret how to play Xbox as the novel activity. So she got to see him in an entirely different light. He also very big on helping his family and understanding what his chores and responsibilities were in the home. And so when we did his plan, we start by talking about what works and doesn't work. And then we talk about those conditions, interests, and contributions that we've been mentioning. We make those task lists for each interest area, and then we develop our list of possible employers. So these are just some examples for Caesar of what worked and what doesn't work. He likes hands-on demonstration, doesn't like too many people around him or telling him what to do. Clear expectations work for him. Sudden changes do not work. You know, if his schedule needs to change, duties need to change, that doesn't work. So routines and consistency work for him. And so we just start the plan by focusing on these things. And this is really an icebreaker for the people attending the plan, because everybody is always willing to tell you what they know about someone, be it good or bad. They'll throw it out there. And this is the place to throw those things out there. And then our characteristics of the job, the conditions, we've already talked about them. Marie also talked about no-go conditions. For the person at Victoria's Secret, we thought that was going to be a no, but that was his dream. And so I believe when Amanda went to pick him up at 4 o'clock in the morning on the first day, he had already been ready for almost an hour. Like he was excited to go to work. But those are conditions. For Caesar, we have some of his conditions listed: daytime hours, no work on Sundays, 4 or 5 hours a day, ideally on Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, within 2 miles of his house, because he's going to ride his bike to and from work. So it's important that we understand these things that have to be in place so that he can be successful. And then our interest area. This is going to be the smallest grouping that we've got. You know, we might have several conditions, we might have several tasks. Interest will be small. And so for Caesar, artwork, yard work, and retail were his 3 interest areas. And we try to keep them broad enough so that many things can fit in there. And again, we want to keep this as a smaller category because I'm going to need a task list for each of these. So if I have 10 areas of interest, that creates a lot of work for me to do a 10 different task lists. And so we really focus on those top 2 or 3 is what we try to find out. And then again, Maria already mentioned this, but we look at our contributions, which are going to include personality characteristics, tasks that I do for an employer. If I have any type of accreditation or certification, maybe we've once worked with someone who had a CPR certification, and it was important that she let people know she was certified in CPR. If someone has letters of recommendations or reference, that's considered a contribution. So for Caesar, very organized, takes care of himself and his brothers, great memory. He remembers his names of high school teachers and learns directions for video games after watching a YouTube video just once or twice. And part of this was for Margaret. When we were doing discovery with Caesar, she didn't know, she knew he had just graduated from school and knew that people that he went to, you know, that taught him in school might have good information, but we didn't have a way to make those connections. So one of the activities she did in getting to know him was sat down and looked through his yearbook. And then he would tell her, this is this teacher. And then she'd ask, who's your favorite teacher? And that's how she began to put together those folks that she was going to contact to talk to and learn information about him. So again, always go back to the job seeker and talk to them. And then our task, we've talked about this. You can see we won't read each task, but we have a specific task list for art. We have a specific task list for yard work, and we have a specific task list for retail for Caesar. So we know what it is we're going to try to negotiate with employers based on what we've seen him do successfully. And then we come up with our list of employers. And so here we would put the employer name. The center column is for interest area. What interest area does that employer fit? And do we have a contact? And when I say contact, I mean anyone. It could be my cousin's husband's sister goes there to get her hair done. Well, let me get to Keith's sister and find out what the name of that hairdresser is. I want to call them and be able to talk to them. And so here, and jump to the end, this is Caesar working. And Caesar's working for the housing authority in his local area. And he's combining actually some of his interesting yard work as well as art. So as we were negotiating this job for him, which was negotiated in the middle of the pandemic, Caesar started working in the middle of the pandemic. And so it can be done at any time if you're really focusing on customization. So we were looking at tasks for the maintenance person who did the lawn care, the yard work, all that kind of stuff for 7 different properties. But he was also the indoor maintenance person. So he might fixing someone, or he might miss fixing someone's toilet because he's weed whacking somewhere. And we said, well, if you add Caesar to the mix, he'll take care of that outside yard work. Does that let you get to more in-house problems faster? Does that help you figure things out and have your residents of the apartments happier? And so that's part of what we used to negotiate that position. And then he's also painting. He actually paints the apartments in between people moving. So we've tied in some of his art interest in painting as well as his yard care or yard work interest. And so here, now we're going to practice. We're not going to break into groups because we've got too many people to break into groups. But we're going to look at an example. Which one do you think we should look at? Still vote Amanda? Okay, so in 5 minutes, we are going to look at Amanda here, who's someone that I worked with and did a lot of work directly with. Marie also knows Amanda, but we didn't stop that. Oh, no.
We only have a few minutes.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do this because it's not open.